Welcome back to TFT Central. Today we're going to be reviewing the brand new MSI MPG 341CQPX QD-OLED monitor. It's the company's upcoming 34-inch ultrawide gaming display, which is attracting a lot of attention at the moment as it's one of the first to use Samsung's new 240Hz QD-OLED panel in this size. This offers a higher refresh rate than the widely used 175Hz first-gen panel from 2022 that has been used in many displays so far, and that's been combined here with all of MSI's 2024 OLED features and extras. At the end of April, we reviewed MSI's other new 34-inch OLED monitor, the MPG 341CQP. The review for that is linked in the description below, but that became our recommended display in this size. Let's see if this updated MPG version can knock that screen off its perch. Here's a quick comparison of the differences in spec and features, with the main two being the higher refresh rate of this newer MPG model and a higher power delivery from the USB-C port. Most of the other features are identical between the two. We'll compare the performance as well throughout the review as we go, and at the end we'll directly compare all the performance and spec areas so that you can decide which one might be better for you. So make sure you stay tuned to the end to see that. We'll also compare this new screen to the popular 34-inch ultra-wide models, like for instance the Dell Alienware AW3423DWF. Let's cover this up front before we get into the rest of the review now. We were originally told by Samsung Display that this new 240Hz QD-OLED panel would feature the same updated pixel structure from their other Gen 2 and Gen 3 panels from 2023 and 2024. That helped improve the text clarity and reduce fringing compared with the first gen panels launched before that in 2022. That included the original 34-inch ultra-wide QD-OLED panel with a 175Hz refresh rate. That seems logical given that this new panel is being developed this year in 2024, 2 years on from their original first-gen 175Hz panel. It's being produced alongside the Gen 3 panels, but we were told that it didn't feature the new quantum enhancer technologies associated with those other panels, and so Samsung themselves called this Gen 2. We labelled this Gen 2.5 as it's been produced this year, and so it doesn't quite fit alongside the other Gen 2 panel, which was 49 inches in size and released last year. Actually, to our surprise, our testing revealed that this new 34-inch panel still uses the old diamond-shaped subpixels from the original first-gen panel. It's not been updated, unfortunately, to the squarer shape from the later generations, and as a result the panel has the same text clarity as the previous 175Hz panels already available. We can't blame MSI for this because they actually never talked about improved text clarity or pixel shape. That actually came from Samsung Display, the panel manufacturer. It does seem strange that having shifted to the newer pixel shape last year in 2023, a new panel being produced now this year in 2024 doesn't feature it. We've reached back out to Samsung Display to get further clarification on this situation and also confirm if we can which panel technologies are utilised here. It's still a newer panel being produced this year, 2 years on from the original panel, but apart from the higher refresh rate, there may not actually be any other obvious spec or performance updates available. We'll provide an update on Samsung's QD-OLED panels, their generations and information at some point soon, as we're also exploring some other new lower refresh rate panels that have started to appear in other sizes. Make sure you do hit subscribe to stay up to date on that. Anyway, the take-home point here is that contrary to what Samsung Display originally told us, and our expectations, this screen and all the other forthcoming 34-inch QD-OLED monitors with a 240Hz refresh rate still have the older pixel shape, and so they don't offer the text clarity improvements that Gen 2 and 3 panels have. We should say though that we still find the text clarity to be better here on these QD-OLED panels than on competing 34-inch WOLED panels from LG Display, with sharper and clearer text overall, which is easier on the eye. Before we get into more of the testing results, let's provide a quick overview of the monitor specs and features. It's 34 inches in size with a 21:9 aspect ratio and an ultra-wide format. It's got a subtle 1800R curvature, which is nice on a screen this size and not too steep. We prefer this to the more aggressive 800R curvature of competing 34-inch WOLED panels. It's got a standard 3440 by 1440 resolution, common on these size screens too, giving you a nice desktop area to work with and a comfortable text size. It's got the normal semi-glossy QD-OLED screen coating as well. That's featured on all the previous 34-inch ultra-wide OLED monitors that are released to market so far. There's a fanless design here with a custom heatsink and graphene panel used for cooling, and the screen is also backed by MSI's 3-year warranty, including cover for burn-in, as their other 2024 models also have. There's also all their new panel protection features under their OLED Care 2.0 suite, as again on their other models, including the new taskbar detection, multi-logo detection and border protection options that we find to be quite useful. There's a USB-C connection with DisplayPort Alt Mode, data transmission and a high 98 watts power delivery. There's also a KVM switch function, picture-in-picture and picture-by-picture support, proper HDMI 2.1 ports for consoles, and support for firmware updates. We should note that both of MSI's new 34-inch ultra-wide models do support firmware updates, unlike some of their other MAG series OLED monitors, so that isn't something you need to be worried about here on these models. Both 34-inch models also support their gaming intelligence software for controlling your settings via an app if you want to. We'll discuss some of the other specs and features in the relevant sections of the review later. Let's look at the gaming performance then. Being an OLED panel, it is well equipped of course to handle gaming and HDR content thanks to its near instant response times, per pixel level dimming and amazing black depth and contrast. Those are all the usual benefits of OLED technology and some of the reasons why it's become so popular and so well suited to gaming displays. The ultra-wide 21:9 aspect ratio format provides a wider field of view than common 16:9 screens, giving you more space for games where this is supported, and that looks really great and makes a real difference in practice. It's especially fun for racing games and the like, and it's a very popular format for these genres. We don't need to say much about the response times, which are excellent as always from this panel technology. We measured a 0.49 milliseconds grey to grey, which remains consistent at all refresh rates and across the variable refresh rate range. There is a very small amount of overshoot along the top row of the table here, with changes from black to grey, but in practice this wasn't visible at all and so wouldn't be considered a problem. When it comes to gaming experience, we provided some pursuit camera photos here, which demonstrate real-world perceived motion clarity of the panel, and the main area of interest here with this new 240Hz refresh rate. This screen is clearer and sharper during gaming than the previous 175Hz MAG series screen and all of the other 34-inch QD-OLED screens that have been released so far that all have that same refresh rate. You get better overall gaming experience and performance as a result, and it's a nice step up from those older panels we felt, as long as you can drive the appropriate frame rates. With that higher refresh rate available here, it can then also support higher frame rates for games, which in turn reduces your end-to-end system latency a little. There's been loads of other 240Hz OLED monitors released to the market so far in various screen sizes, so it is good to see the 34-inch QD-OLED segment catch up here. You can get further small improvements in motion clarity and frame rate support if you move up to a higher refresh rate like 360Hz. That's now available in the OLED market, but to be honest, the 240Hz offers very good performance with super clear motion, and only serious and competitive gamers are likely to see much difference moving higher than this anyway. The screen can support variable refresh rates from compatible systems, although in certain situations and games you might see some flicker, which is an inherent problem with OLED panels and something that we do hope to investigate further in the future. Unlike the lower spec MAG model, the screen has not yet been certified under the AMD FreeSync scheme at all, with MSI only listing adaptive sync on their product page at the moment. Although that could of course still be in progress. It does support VRR for consoles via the HDMI 2.1 ports, which is useful though of course. We also confirm that the screen does support NVIDIA DSR and DLDSR technologies, even at the full native resolution and refresh rate, despite the screen needing to use display stream compression or DSC to support this. That means that if you're an NVIDIA user, you can upscale the image resolution if your system can handle it to increase the detail in gaming. Because the screen uses DSC over its DisplayPort connection to support the 3440 by 1440 resolution at 240Hz refresh rate, there's no limitations here around colour depth support on the MPG model, like there was on the MAG series model. You can run at 10-bit fine over DisplayPort, USB-C and HDMI. On the MAG model, which didn't use DSE at all, you can only select 10-bit up to 144Hz refresh rate over DisplayPort and USB-C, although you could go higher and all the way up to 175Hz if you use the HDMI 2.1 and your graphics card supported that connection. The full capabilities are a bit more accessible here, even on slightly older graphics cards, as DSC over DisplayPort has been around a fair bit longer than HDMI 2.1 has. Input lag is super low at the native refresh rate, as with all their other OLED monitors, and so should be perfectly fine for competitive gaming. It's higher for devices with a fixed 60Hz input, although do keep in mind that it's the 240Hz figure that's going to apply for VRR PC gaming, so the vast majority of situations you'll be getting that nice low lag. Console support was very good here as well, thanks to the proper full bandwidth HDMI 2.1 ports. You can input a virtual 4K resolution, which importantly allows then for HDR support from an Xbox Series X, and you can run the console up to 4K 120Hz fine. Despite this being an ultra-wide screen, there are ample aspect ratio controls to handle the non-native 16:9 ratio input signal too, and there's support for features like VRR and HDMI CEC, which are handy too. This screen only supports HDR10 content, not Dolby Vision, so there's a small gap there in terms of support for some games. The only other gap seemed to be the lack of support for 4K 24Hz content, at least as reported by the Xbox Series X. Auto Low Latency Mode, or ALLM, was also not selectable on the console, but not really needed on a desktop monitor like this anyway. For office and general uses, you need to be mindful of the older pixel structure that we talked about earlier, which leads to some fringing on text, and it doesn't look as clear and sharp as Gen 2 and Gen 3 QD-OLED panels, where the pixel shape has been updated. It's not terrible or anything, but if you're using it for a lot of text work, it won't look as clear as LCD screens you might be used to. It is better, we think, than competing WOLED panels in this size though. You can see various measurements here for the spectral distribution and brightness control. Thankfully, despite there being no specific setting for this in the on-screen menu, or it being referenced on the product page at all, the display operates with a uniform brightness in SDR mode. That means there's no automatic brightness limiter or ABL in operation, and you get nice consistent brightness from the screen regardless of your window size and your content. There's no annoying dimming as you resize and move Office documents around that happens on some OLED monitors. The luminance can reach up to 245 nits in the default Eco mode, although it can reach a bit higher in the other modes, which are likely to be the ones that you would use. That brings it in line with other modern OLED screens, which reach up to around 260 to 270 nits commonly. We'd seen the MAG model only reach lower brightness of around 205 to 215 nits in the emulation modes, for instance, so there was an improvement here on this model. This should be adequate for most users unless you want to use the display in very brightly lit rooms. This performance was consistent in Windows Desktop, by the way, outside of test pattern measurements. We provided some recommended settings here to achieve common 200, 150 and 120 nits luminance levels. The screen can also reach down to a low luminance level of 34 nits minimum if you need to use the screen in darker environments, which is good. SDR shadow detail was only moderate, with the first RGB box visible in this test pattern being number 6. Note that the boxes that you can see on your screen viewing this video and the test pattern will of course vary. OLED panels often struggle natively with this shadow detail, as was the case here. It isn't really any better in any of the other modes, although you could tweak things a little using the night vision setting that's available in the gaming menu. Calibration and profiling of the screen can improve this nicely though. Being a QD-OLED panel, you do need to be mindful of your lighting positions, as any bright light sources located in front of the screen can impact the perceived black depth because of the lack of a polarizer on the panel and the inadvertent activation of the quantum dot layer. That causes blacks to be raised and they start to look more grey in appearance, and that's an inherent challenge on QD-OLED panels, as we explored in our detailed recent study. And so here the ambient light handling is rated as poor compared to competing WOLED panels. The large screen, ultra-wide resolution and comfortable text size make it well suited to the occasional multitasking and productivity applications when you need to. You need to be mindful of using an OLED screen like this for static content due to image retention risks, although with the wide range of panel protection features and the 3-year burn-in warranty, it should give you some added peace of mind. The standard semi-glossy QD-OLED panel coating provides a clean and clear image, which we definitely prefer generally over the grainier AG coating of competing WOLED monitors. Although it does lead to more glare and reflection, so you again need to be mindful of your ambient light levels and their position. You'll get more noticeable reflections in well-lit rooms or if you've got windows or lamps that are near or facing the screen. There's a very good range of extra features here that will enhance the user experience, including USB-C that offers a 98 watts power delivery for single cable connectivity from laptops and other devices. There's some USB data ports, of course, as normal, a KVM switch function so you can control 2 systems connected to a single display. Picture-in-picture and picture-by-picture are also available if you want to handle multiple inputs on the screen at once. A very good range of features on this model like their other new 2024 OLED screens, and a step up from many competing 34-inch ultra-wide OLED monitors previously released to the market. The screen comes out of the box in the Eco preset mode, which we tested first of all. This mode was reasonably well set up, although the gamma curve was not accurate and was too high in darker grade shades, which can result in some loss of shadow detail. There's no gamma control in the on-screen display menu, unfortunately, so we will hope for better performance in some of the other modes, or rely on a calibration of the screen ourselves. The colour temp was a little too warm as the red channel balance goes a little bit too high. In this mode, the screen operates with its full native colour space, which we measured at reaching 143% relative coverage of our sRGB. That's about 5% more in fact than the MAG model with its older 175Hz panel, so there's been a few updates there to the colour space of this new panel too. This very wide gamut means that when you display sRGB content, including SDR, which is mastered in that smaller colour space, the colours are oversaturated and more vivid than they should be, which results in poor colour accuracy and a delta E average of 5.6 in our measurements. This is common though for wide gamut screens, and we'll look at how we can improve that in a moment through other modes. Relative to several wide gamut colour spaces, there is very good absolute coverage of DCI-P3 and Adobe RGB, making it viable to use a screen to work with content in both those gamuts in theory. You can see that the native gamut of the panel extends a reasonable way beyond the 2 reference colour spaces though, although it's reasonably close to DCI-P3 overall. As a result, viewing DCI-P3 colours in this mode is better than viewing sRGB colours and results in a moderate colour accuracy with a delta E of 3.5 measured. As with all the other recent MSI OLED monitors, there are 3 provided emulation modes in the menu, which will clamp the native colour space back to the target gamut. As you can see here, these all work very nicely, cutting back the overcoverage of the native gamut mode and being only a few percentage points out overall in relative coverage. The sRGB mode could have perhaps been a little tighter, as it still had a 7.1% overcoverage in red shades. We tested the accuracy of each of these modes with particular interest in the sRGB mode, which might be commonly used to handle SDR content. The gamma in this mode was much better than the default Eco mode, being much closer now to the 2.2 target across the grayscale, which we were pleased with. Colour temp and white point was slightly too warm in this mode again by around 4% because of the red channel being a little off. You don't have access to the RGB controls or colour temp settings in this mode though, but it was still close to the target. You do, however, thankfully still have access to the brightness control, meaning you can customise the brightness to suit your preferences and ambient light conditions. With the colour space now nicely clamped back to sRGB, the accuracy of sRGB colours was very good, with an average delta E of 1.5 measured. This should be a nice usable mode if you want to use it for work in sRGB and SDR content more accurately. The other DCI-P3 and Adobe RGB emulation modes were pretty similar to the default Eco mode when it comes to gamma and colour temp, and unfortunately the gamma was not as accurate as it had been in the factory calibrated sRGB mode. With the colour spaces nicely clamped though, we get good colour accuracy in those relative colour spaces, which was great news. After calibration, you can get excellent results on the monitor. Here we've profiled the screen in the full native wide gamut mode, but mapped the colour space back to sRGB for colour aware applications. You can check out our best settings video guide linked in the description below, and also maybe try out our calibrated ICC profile that's available in our database, also linked in the description. When it comes to HDR, this monitor is well equipped to handle HDR from a hardware point of view thanks to its OLED panel, which offers per pixel level dimming, true blacks, and basically infinite contrast ratio in the right ambient lighting situations. HDR content should ideally be viewed in a dark or very dimly lit room, so the potentially raised blacks on QD-OLED panels is less likely to be a problem in these situations. Viewing in those conditions would also help reduce the glare and reflections that you might otherwise experience on the panel coating. Anyway, the OLED panel's pixel level dimming means you don't get any halos or blooming in HDR content like you do on many LCD monitors, even those with high-end mini LED backlights. The screen has the familiar two HDR modes available in the on-screen menu for True Black 400 and Peak 1000. We'll talk about the brightness in a moment, but we measure both of these modes first of all using our standard testing approach. The True Black 400 mode has a generally accurate setup, although there's a couple of areas of note. Firstly, if you refer to the EOTF graph on the right hand side here, which tracks the PQ curve for HDR content, you can see that in the near black dark grey shades, the grey line for the monitor performance is slightly lower than the yellow target line. That means that the luminance for those darkest grey shades is a little lower than it should be, which in practice can slightly crush some shadow detail. But actually it's still a lot easier to distinguish dark grey shades than it was in the SDR mode, and it's unlikely to cause any major issues. Colour temp and white point were good overall, although slightly too warm from the D65 white point target. And with the wide colour gamut of the QD-OLED panel, there was decent coverage of the DCI-P3 and Rec 2020 colour spaces and good overall colour accuracy as well. It's a similar story in the Peak 1000 mode with a very similar PQ tracking, again a little darker than intended in dark grey shades, and a slightly too warm colour temp and white point. Both modes behave very similarly in these tests though, again with good overall colour accuracy. Let's talk about brightness then, as this is a more complicated area and our recent studies and investigations have uncovered some complexities which seem to be common across many OLED screens at the moment. Let's start by comparing the typical white luminance measurement of both available HDR modes. Here we get the following results, which are fairly typical and probably as expected really if you've seen any other OLED monitor reviews in the last few years. The True Black mode caps out at around 484 nits luminance, even for the smallest APL sample areas, whereas the Peak 1000 mode can reach the full potential of the panel at 1088 nits. If you're unfamiliar with terms like APL, then check out our article which explains these terms linked below. From these initial measurements, you might conclude that both modes reach the same brightness for all APL levels until you get to the smaller highlights below 10%, at which point maybe the Peak 1000 mode can then reach a lot higher. The Peak 1000 mode would therefore seem to be optimal and brighter, right? Unfortunately, it's a lot more complex than that, and we're seeing similar patterns from most QD-OLED monitors being released at the moment. It's common actually for the True Black 400 modes to look and appear brighter during normal real-world HDR viewing, despite those basic white luminance measurements, and there's a reason for this. If we add in our new HDR brightness testing we've introduced in recent reviews, we can explore the performance on the screen further and establish which mode is brighter in real use. This first table shows the luminance error across various APLs and grayscales. You can see that the True Black 400 mode generally has small errors in luminance, and even for the larger APL areas in the mid-grey shades between 55 and 65, they are a little bit darker than intended, but actually this is within the confines of acceptable and deliberate roll-off, as that helps to preserve lighter grey shades. We can see this as well if we look at a few example EOTF graphs here. These graphs are also useful as they highlight the darker than intended dark grey shades near black that we discussed earlier. The most interesting and relevant part of the data is considering the luminance across the mid-grey shades, as these have a direct impact on actual real-world HDR brightness and experience. The reason for this will become evident more later on when we look at the other Peak 1000 mode as well. This graph plots the average luminance of the mid-grey shades shown on the gradient bar on the left and compares them to the intended target luminance. You can see that the achieved grayscale luminance here is very close to the target line. We can conclude therefore from all this data that the True Black 400 mode is generally nice and accurate in its luminance. It's a little darker than intended for near black grey shades, and of course it doesn't reach very bright overall with about 488 nits as a peak white luminance, but the EOTF tracking and luminance accuracy is good at all APLs. If we now look at the Peak 1000 mode, it starts to become more apparent where there are issues with this mode, despite the white luminance measurements suggesting that it should be the same or brighter than the True Black 400 mode. The luminance accuracy of the larger APL is poor, with large errors in mid-grey shades where the luminance is a lot lower, up to 173 nits in the most extreme examples. That's a lot lower than the intended luminance. You can see what's going on in the EOTF graphs as well, where for the larger APL it starts to roll off in a major way for those shades between about grayscale 40 and 75. The grey line of the measurements is a lot lower than the yellow target line. If we compare the average grayscale luminance again, you can see that in this Peak 1000 mode, the mid-grey shades are a lot darker than intended, which is a common theme on most QD-OLED screens it seems. If we compare the average grayscale luminance directly between the two modes, you can see that the True Black 400 mode is generally brighter for all APL above 10%, which explains why in practice this mode can look brighter in many situations than the Peak 1000 mode. As a result, you might want to experiment with the two different modes to see which you prefer, as it may vary depending on your content, your game, and your user preference. If you want more information on this data and HDR brightness investigations, please do check out our article linked below. We also recently investigated how colour brightness is impacted by different OLED panel technologies and colour spaces, and that's one aspect of HDR performance that cannot be accounted for in simple white measurements either. We already have a method in place to measure colours and convert them into an XCR score that represents perceived brightness in real use by the viewer. You can see on this graph that the brightness of colours can still be high even for the smallest APL measurements and the smallest HDR highlights in content, which is a strength of QD-OLED technology. To put that into perspective more, here's a graph showing the same results but from a modern competing 34-inch ultra-wide WOLED panel. That actually has a higher 1300 nits peak brightness spec, but you can see that while the white brightness can reach higher on this panel, the brightness of colours reaches a peak at around 25% APL and cannot get any brighter beyond that. This can lead then to some wash out of the image in colours for small APL scenes where the white is boosted but colours cannot keep up. In practice, along with the smaller colour gamut of those panels compared with QD-OLED, this can lead to less colourful looking images during HDR scenes. The take-home point really here is that colour brightness remains very strong on the screen even for the smallest APL thanks to its QD-OLED panel. It's very similar to the other 2024 QD-OLED monitors that we've seen released by MSI so far, including the MAG model, which is compared directly here. The MPG model is around 1% brighter than the MAG model. In conclusion, the MPG 341CQPX is another great screen in MSI's 2024 OLED monitor lineup. It's got some great all-round performance and an extensive feature set which we've come to expect now from their OLED monitors. Should you buy this new MPG model when it's released, or just get the MAG model that's available already? That was already our top pick actually in the 34-inch OLED monitor market, so is this new model much better? We've provided some direct comparisons here between the two models, but do feel free to pause if you need to absorb any of the detail. From an accuracy and setup point of view for both SDR and HDR content, there's very little really to separate the two, to be honest. They both perform very similarly overall. There's some minor differences here and there, with each model being slightly better in some areas and slightly worse in others. Nothing that's going to be significant or noticeable, we don't think, to any average user. The real differences are on this table, with the new MPG model having a decent advantage over the MAG model when it comes to gaming experience especially. The most obvious difference is the higher 240Hz refresh rate, which makes a noticeable difference to gaming experience, motion clarity and overall gaming performance. It also has better support for 10-bit color depth content at higher refresh rates. Apart from that, it can also get a little bit brighter for SDR content and general office uses, and of course it has a higher power delivery from its USB-C port, so if you're planning to connect a laptop or other device with a single cable, that might be important to you. The 15 watts of the MAG model isn't going to power much here. At the time of this video, the MAG model is available for as low as $780 US, with the MPG model expected to retail for $1,000 when it's released. So that's a considerable difference of around $220 to think about. You can check latest pricing and availability for your region using our links below in the description. The MPG model is overall a better screen, but you can save some money if you aren't bothered about those aspects that we've just talked about. The MAG model is still great, and until this new model is even properly released, it will remain our recommended option for a 34-inch OLED monitor. When the MPG model is released, depending on what the price ends up being, if it's close to the MAG model, that would probably become our overall best pick in this segment. In the review of the MAG model, we also compared that to the previous long-standing recommendation in the 34-inch segment, and that's been the popular Dell Alienware AW3423DWF. But the MSI MAG model overtook that when it was released for the reasons shown here in the table. The MPG 341CQPX is our new favourite 34-inch OLED monitor performance-wise, offering a better overall performance and spec than the MAG model. Although both are great screens, and certainly until this new screen is actually released, or if you want to save a bit of money, the MAG model is definitely still worth checking out. We'd love to hear in the comments section below which OLED monitor you're looking to buy and answer any questions that you might have. Please give us a like if you've enjoyed this video, and don't forget to hit subscribe to stay up to date on future reviews and monitor content. Thank you for watching, we'll catch you next time.